Are we going to go through another 15 to 20 ballots before people decide that putting Jim Jordan in as speaker is just too nuts even for this Republican Party?
Well, first of all, there is nothing too nuts for this Republican Party. So let's set that one aside. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
The Scalise vote was actually the big one because that tells. So McCarthy gets chucked. Scalise is the guy. He's the number 2, right? He's the most logical choice. He's the one who he has the best relationships with other House Republicans. The fact that Scalise couldn't get enough tells you we're already in a. I mean, he had the best chance.
Yeah.
He had the best chance.
Yeah.
So everything from here on in is less likelihood of it. The fact that Jordan is the next guy up is because the crazies are in control. Because the crazies, the Matt Gaetzes, are the ones who won't vote for anyone who isn't exactly like. So all of the normie Republicans, to the extent that they still exist, are kind of out of the equation because they're the ones who are flexible, right? They'll be just like, give me Austin Scott, give me somebody to vote for, right? Sorry, that's the dark horse guy.
Right.
And so we're in the stage where we have to appease the crazies because that's where the Republican Party is, and there's very little likelihood of getting enough votes. So I don't see a way out of it. The crazy vote that you brought up, Charlie. How many of you would vote for me on the floor? That's because the Republicans are afraid to take this to the floor because it's going to show everyone how nuts and chaotic.
But they're going to do it. They're going to do it because Jim Jordan apparently wants to get people on the record so that he can beat them up. So I just think, look, there's at least, correct me if I'm wrong, at least 12 Republican congressmen who were elected in districts that Joe Biden won. Clearly, there are a lot of people who know who Jim Jordan is, who know he's an idiot, who know he can't be trusted, who are just cannot stand the idea. So the question is, will there be more than 4 who will just say no or vote for somebody else? And I think there's a high likelihood of that. Again, I don't want to be the optimist here. So then what happens? Then the question is, all right, there was been a lot of, I think, wish casting over the weekend about how, maybe they should caucus with the Democrats, elect Hakeem Jeffries, people that is just not going to happen. They are not going to elect Hakeem Jeffries. But is it at this point completely impossible that there could be a bipartisan deal to say, keep Patrick McHenry in position, but and empower him, but with the requirement that you don't shut down the federal government, that you vote on aid for Ukraine and Israel, and that you maybe change some of the floor rules? Is that impossible, Will?
I wouldn't say impossible. First of all, none of this is totally impossible because we're in the realm of the unlikely already.
Right. Everything is unlikely.
So the interesting thing to me is that Hakeem Jeffries was on one of the talk shows yesterday, and he said, "We're not playing for an individual. We're not negotiating that we want a specific speaker. No. He wants to get." So correct me if I'm wrong. The Hastert rule is the one that says if you don't have a majority of Republicans supporting whatever the legislation, it doesn't even come to the floor.
Yeah.
So he wants to get rid of that. That's his deal. We'll come on board, and he's not saying support me, Hakeem Jeffries, because he knows he's not going to get that. We'll cut a deal with you to give you our votes for a speaker, and then you won't have to capitulate to the crazies. You don't need Gates's vote because you got mine in exchange for waiving that rule. And then the House would be much more bipartisan than it is. And the question is, can things get bad enough in the Republican Party that they would make that deal? Because there are enough. So those folks in the Biden districts, Charlie, that you brought up, they'd be happy to make that deal. I think.
Or but they're also inviting being primaried, and even if it's in an overwhelmingly Biden district or even an overwhelmingly Republican district, the primary is a scary prospect for all of them. So I don't know. I mean, either way strikes me as potentially political suicide. They vote for Jim Jordan, they'll lose their seats in the general election. They vote against Jim Jordan, they might lose their seats in a primary election.
But those, let me come back to those because you said there are 12 of them, right? And I don't know what the exact number is. I don't know, but it's relatively few, and that's the problem, okay? Because the more districts we can create where the incentive structure is to win in the general election, as opposed to the primary, the more sane the Republican Party will be. It shouldn't be that winning the primary is the whole ball game in your district. It should be competitive districts. Then you have to behave like a normal person who has to win some people on the other side of the political aisle.
So over the weekend, there was, obviously, as you know, people are going on the Sunday morning talk shows to talk about really Jim Jordan. Seriously, you think that he's a viable candidate for speaker? That this actually makes sense for the Republican Party. One of the more interesting exchanges was Jake Tapper and Dan Crenshaw. Now, I've written about Dan Crenshaw in the past. There's a whole segment of folks out there that want to believe in Dan Crenshaw, that want to think that Dan Crenshaw represents something new and refreshing and independent. And one of those is Dan Crenshaw, who actually wrote a whole book about values and virtue and everything. And our colleague Tim Miller did a review of it. It's really a remarkable book because he'll talk through the values and the principles and the character traits that you want in a good leader, and somehow reconcile that with sucking up to Donald Trump. I mean, it's impossible to do, but Dan Crenshaw is one of these guys that wants to say, no, I'm actually sane, normal, and decent. And yet there he is on the Sunday shows yesterday explaining why he's supporting Jim freaking Jordan to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Listen to this.
What I would remind a lot of the members who are against Jordan, because his reputation precedes him, but his reputation has changed over time. He has become part of the solution, not part of the problem. He has long since been part of the solution. I've had a lot of good conversations with him. I've gotten to know him. There's a reason I support him.
He was trying
giving McHenry additional powers. Well, that still requires a vote, and what kind of powers? I mean, at a certain point, you're just electing him speaker.
Yeah.
And so, and he doesn't want that. He's asking us not to do that.
I mean, he defied the congressional subpoena, and he was trying to get Pence to overturn the electoral votes. But anyway, you're in the Jordan camp.
But a lot of them did that. If I held that grudge, I wouldn't have friends in the Republican conference.
That's two-thirds of the conference. That's an excellent point.
I was on an island there.
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, so let's just translate that. Ian Bass, and I don't have it right in front of me, but basically, all of my friends are like seditionists who tried to overturn the election. And, if I actually held sedition against them, then I'd have no friends whatsoever.
Right. What was the Republican complaint about the teachers' unions that were passing all the kids who should be flunking? We've lowered the standards. So here's the Republican Party, right? I can't apply the standard of doing the right thing on January 6th about protecting democracy because then I wouldn't have any Republicans.
Yeah.
It's the greatest confession in the world.
So I don't want to beat this horse too much, but I think this would be a good moment just to remind ourselves about who Jim Jordan is. I mean, Jake Tapper mentioned that he refused to comply with a congressional subpoena, so much for his collegiality. This is from David Korn and I think Dan Friedman from Mother Jones. I mean, here's the strange world that I'm quoting from Mother Jones, but just reminding us who Jim Jordan was. Jordan was an early and enthusiastic recruit in Trump's war on the Republic and reality in public and in private. Days after the November election, he spoke at a Stop the Steal rally in front of the Pennsylvania state capitol. He spread election conspiracy theories within right-wing media. He endorsed Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell's bogus claim that Dominion voting systems and Smartmatic had robbed Trump of electoral victory. Okay, so now we're looping back to the crazy lady. Jim Jordan is this far away from her. He was spreading the Dominion voting lie, which, by the way, cost Fox, $787 million. He called for a congressional investigation of electoral fraud, for which there was no evidence, and demanded a special counsel be appointed. He endorsed state legislatures canceling vote tallies and selecting their own presidential electors. He urged Trump not to concede. He demanded that Congress not certify Joe Biden's victory in the ceremony scheduled for January 6, 2021. Behind the scenes, he schemed with Trump. The final report of the House Select Committee on January 6 lays out in damning detail Jim Jordan's participation in Trump's election thwarting machinations. Quote, Representative Jordan was a significant player in President Trump's efforts, the committee said. He participated in numerous post-election meetings in which senior White House officials, Rudy Giuliani and others, discussed strategies for challenging the election. Chief among them claims the election had been tainted by fraud. As early as November, Jordan was, quote, involved in discussions with White House officials about Vice President Mike Pence's role on January 6th, the report noted. Conversations that focused on whether Pence could block the certification of Biden's win. Jordan was one of 10 Republican members of Congress who attended a White House meeting on December 21st, where the topic was how to pressure Pence to undo the election. And we could spend the rest of the podcast going through just remember who Jim Jordan was. Jim Jordan, the guy who was responsible for the tweet, Elon, Kanye, Trump.
Right.
He's the guy who is continuing to harass Fani Willis because he sees his role in Congress as being the obstructor in chief. So it is worthwhile. I mean, then putting this in context. So there's Dan Crenshaw saying, hey, if I held this against everybody, I'd have no friends. Right, Dan? That probably should tell you something.
Right. Okay. Now, you and I have talked about this before, and you have made the point, and you're right, that Jordan is not just another one of the Republicans who voted against certifying the election, right? So Jordan went further than others. And let me just come to that last point. By the way, love Mother Jones. I used to write for Mother Jones. David Corn's a great guy. Friedman's a great guy. So
from Mother Jones to the Bulwark. Okay.
And what I love about them is that they are very focused on facts, right? And that article that you just mentioned, they've laid out a lot of facts. And let me just come to the last one, because I think that's the important one. Jordan, there are varying degrees of complicity and guilt in January 6th. There were a lot of people who lied after the election and spouted fraud and all that. But Jordan was one of the guys who was behind the scenes. He was in the meetings. And as you get closer and closer to January 20th, 2021, you get to January 6th, you get conspiracies to go beyond January 6th. Right. Jordan's participation in that meeting where they're trying to get Pence to stop the certification and push things past January 6th. Now you're getting into territory where you're going to keep the defeated president in power past when the Constitution says he's supposed to be out of power. It's that much further into the madness. And Jim Jordan, we must never forget his role in that. We must never forget that we don't even know enough about him because of his defiance of the subpoena, right? And Liz Cheney has said Jordan's not just another pretty face here. In this case, not just another ugly face, right? He's particularly complicit in this. He's particularly dangerous. And it's not, I would say, in a choice between Scalise and Jordan, it's not close. I was wrong about that last week. Yeah. And
Okay, so in another mind-blowing moment that would cut against any optimism about the GOP normies, Mike Pence was asked about this over the weekend. Mike Pence says that Jim Jordan would make a great speaker. See, I have to tell you, guys like Mike Pence just continue to blow my mind. At some point, every once in a while, you'll think, okay, Mike Pence has suddenly realized, I'm not going to be president. I'm not going to win this nomination. I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory. I'm going to say what I think. I'm going to call out the seditionists. I'm going to say that Donald Trump tried to get me to ignore the Constitution, and that that's the hill I'm going to die on. And then it's like Mike Pence goes, no, and Jim freaking Jordan. How do you explain this to me, Will?
It does matter that Mike Pence on January 6th didn't go along with the plot to stop the certification. It always matters. We're going to give Pence credit for that. But having said that, Pence is one of these guys who's very concerned with his personal piety, his personal reputation. I did the right thing. By God's grace, he always says. You know, thanks to God, I did the right thing. And, that's great. Yeah. That's really wonderful. But if you're interested in protecting the United States as opposed to your personal reputation, then it can't end on January 6th. You can't, after January 6th, and having done the right thing, then turn around and say, I'll put a guy like Jim Jordan back in power. Because,
So why is he doing it? Wouldn't this be a moment of saying, the Republicans have so many brilliant, bright people in the House of Representatives. How about somebody that did not try to overturn the election? This goes back to the Dan Crenshaw problem. Boy, if it says that, they got nobody, right?
Exactly. It's because, look, let's go back up. Remember, Liz Cheney is what you would do if you're serious about protecting the Constitution, right? You are a Kinzinger. You draw a line, you say, anybody who doesn't meet the test of defending the Constitution is out. And if that means, 67% of the House Republican Conference, then so be it. I'm going to protect the Constitution. Once you go down the Crenshaw road of saying, hey, I got to work with what I got here, and that's where the Republican Party is, then you're just dropping standards one by one, And so this is just another one. Pence ends up saying, yeah, Jordan's okay because that's who the House Republicans would nominate.